couple of big things happening in Washington last week. One, a new farm bill was passed and signed into law. The second, more about what hasn't happened, the debt ceiling. With us now to talk about both Congressman Pete Gallego, who happens to be a member of the House Agriculture Committee.
I am.
Tell me a little about the farm bill that was signed.
Well, it saves a lot of money, about you know, in the billions actually, with respect to some of the crop programs, because we end direct payments. We start cutting down on some of the conservation programs, the programs that, you know, where people were essentially paid not to grow, those kinds of things.
CRP programs.
The CRP is we're kind of weaning ourselves off of that. I think the most controversial part, though, was with respect to what's called the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and that ended up with about an $8 billion cut. Originally, on the House side, the suggestion had been a $40 billion cut, which would have been pretty significant. As it is, it doesn't really hit Texas very hard.
What's in it good for Texas?
Well, there's a lot of things that are good for Texas. I mean, the first thing is some stability in the market. I mean, all of the farmers and ranchers in Texas had been wondering, you know, what are we doing? One of the biggest things, for example, is the crop insurance portion. We're in a drought. And should you go out and, you know, what happens if you go out and you plow your fields and then there's no water, for example? That's certainly happening to the cotton farmers in El Paso, as an example. So is the bank going to lend me money? Is the bank going to foreclose? What's going to happen? There's some certainty in the programs now, and I think that's a huge deal. You know, a businessman kind of likes a little bit of certainty.
Oh, yeah. The cuts in the SNAP program, I think I had read in one of the releases your team had sent out that it really wasn't going to impact Texas much. Right. Unless, of course, you're on the SNAP program, they are going to feel it in some way. If there truly are $8 billion in cuts, but that $8 billion is spanned out over several years, is it not?
Well, here's the issue. The $8 billion in cuts comes in a program that's called LIHEAP. It's Low-Income Heating Assistance. And Texas doesn't participate in that program. So if you're on SNAP in Texas, you're really not going to feel it over a period of time. Now, if you're in California that does participate in the LIHEAP program,
or New York,
where
it's cold, sure,
you're going to have. But because Texas doesn't really participate in that program, then those losses are not really felt in Texas.
We were talking during the break a while ago. The Cato Institute really just grilled Congress as a whole about this. Both Republicans and Democrats said all Congress did was mug the American people in this. They say it's a $258 billion increase, a 37% jump in real spending over the 10-year life of this bill. That's crazy.
Well, I have my differences of opinion with the Cato Institute, obviously, and frankly, a lot of that is just, it's fundamental, a philosophical difference, I think, between the folks at the Institute and many of the members of Congress. The idea, for example, that you would separate, one of their goals is to separate the SNAP stuff, the food stamps and nutrition assistance, from the agriculture portion, from the farming. And the truth is that many times, if you want to be able to pass a bill, you got to put something in there for everybody. Otherwise, everybody always votes against everything. And so they hook things on in order to be able to make the legislation move. That's just a practical thing to make legislation move. And I think if you do away with some of that, what will happen, especially as the country gets more urban, is you'll have all of the urban people voting against the agriculture stuff, and then you'll have all of the rural people many times voting against the SNAP stuff. And this way you can actually put together a reasonable middle of people who can, you know, work together. And I will tell you, the Farm Bill, it took, gosh, it was 2 years too long because it should have been reauthorized in the last Congress. But and it was a very painful process for a lot of people. But at least at the end, we were able to come to an agreement, and that's a pretty big deal in Congress. We don't get to an agreement very often.
Well, it's a midterm election coming up. That's why. We're going to talk about some of the things that's in that bill that you have to put in there with Cato Institute, and a lot of Americans would think was pork projects. We're going to touch on some of those. We'll come back more with Congressman Pete Gallego.